What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports here on the Ohio State channel at the Voice of College Football, and we're going to break down Ohio State versus TCU. So if TCU loses in the Big 12 championship game, which team will make the college football playoff if it comes down to the Buckeyes and the Horned Frogs? A lot of drama tomorrow night for Ohio State fans, and that's going to be because of where they're ranked with Alabama in comparison to Alabama. So if Ohio State is ahead of Alabama, they're in pretty good shape to possibly get in the college football playoff if there is a loss by USC or a loss by TCU. If they're behind Alabama, then your season's probably over. And I've really looked at this. I've compared the two teams, compared the resumes, looked at what the committee has done this year. I'm a little concerned if I'm an Ohio State fan just because of the way the committee has penalized teams for losing by a lot of points. But I think the resume is there for Ohio State. I feel pretty confident, especially with the one loss versus two losses. I feel pretty confident that Ohio State will be right there at number 5 ahead of Alabama. Of course, we're not going to know that for sure until we get the rankings tomorrow night. If Alabama is ahead of Ohio State, like I said, it's over for Ohio State. They're not going to make the college football playoff, more than likely. But for this video, we're going to say that Ohio State is at number 5. And we know that if USC loses to Utah in the Pac-12 championship, Ohio State will move up to number 4. Ohio State will be in the college football playoff. So you got to root for Utah on Friday night if you're an Ohio State fan. We know that. I feel confident if Ohio State's ahead of Alabama this week and USC loses, Ohio State will be in the playoff. The controversy that could possibly come is going to be, what if TCU loses to Kansas State in the Big 12 championship, and let's say USC wins, and the final playoff spot comes down to TCU and Ohio State, both with one loss, both teams neither team would be a conference champion. So who would get in that scenario? And I think it's a really interesting debate. I think there are arguments for both sides on this. A lot of it probably would come down to how TCU lost that game to Kansas State. So let's just jump into it. Let's look at the resumes. I'll tell you what I think should happen if TCU does lose, and it's down to these two teams. And I'll tell you what I think the committee is going to do if it does in fact happen. All right, so you look at the resumes. TCU's best win is over Kansas State, a 3-loss team. Ohio State's best win is over a 2-loss Penn State. After that, it's pretty similar. TCU with a win over a 4-loss Texas. Ohio State with a win over a 4-loss Notre Dame. TCU with wins over a couple of 5-loss teams, a couple of 7-5 teams in Texas Tech and Oklahoma State. Ohio State with wins over Maryland and Iowa. One thing the committee could possibly do to help TCU here, and they've done this in the past, I know with Clemson especially, they could also go down the line and look at Oklahoma, Kansas, Baylor. Those are 3 teams that are 6-6 that TCU beat. And the committee has given teams credit for beating bowl-eligible teams in the past. So if it's really close, TCU beating those teams, that could be a difference. I think Ohio State's only win over a 6-6 team is Wisconsin. And I'm not looking at group of 5 teams. Again, if you want to go down that and look at those teams, I guess you could. But I don't think the committee really values those wins much at all. So TCU would have more wins over bowl-eligible teams, but Ohio State would have, the better win. Penn State a better win than Kansas State. Another thing that I think could help Ohio State is the fact that all of these wins, all of these big wins for TCU, their best 4 wins, all came at home except for Texas. Well, 3 of the 4 came at home. So Kansas State was at home, Texas Tech was at home, Oklahoma State was at home. So you get 3 of these 4 wins at home. Texas would be that one road game. Ohio State got their best win on the road at Penn State, also went on the road and beat Maryland. So only 2 of their 4 best wins were at home, 2 of them on the road. But overall, the resumes are pretty similar. I would say that Ohio State has been more dominant throughout the season. TCU has had a lot of close games. So I think that kind of factors in for Ohio State. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be about the loss and how TCU loses to Kansas State. I hate penalizing a team for going to a conference championship game. I don't think TCU should be penalized for having for playing in the Big 12 championship while Ohio State sits at home. That's just kind of my thing. But I understand with the way the current format is, that conference championship game is just another measuring stick. And so TCU will have another opportunity to show how good they are, or potentially show some flaws against a good Kansas State team. But again, the resume is very similar. Kansas State, Penn State, both I think will be in the top 10 this week. And then you look at a top 25 Texas win for TCU. Then you look at a top 25 Notre Dame win for Ohio State. I mean, it's very similar. These resumes are very similar. Again, I would circle back and say that Ohio State has been the more dominant team this year, but they lost by 22 points to Michigan at home, and that could ultimately be what keeps Ohio State out of the playoff. You could argue that that game was close. Even going into the fourth quarter, that was still a close game. Michigan just kind of exploded there at the end, and the teams are much closer than that 22 number. And that's that's a fair argument to make. But again, Ohio State losing at home, I think that's going to hurt. So if TCU plays Kansas State really, really close, if it is a one-score game, I tend to believe that TCU would get the nod. I think TCU would be in over Ohio State in that scenario. You could also look at the brand name of Ohio State. Does the committee go with that? It's tough. It's a tough debate. I mean, if it does come down to this, I really don't feel confident saying that it's going to go one way or the other. But I do believe that if TCU loses by, I'm going to say 10 points, if they lose by double digits, by 2 scores or more, I feel like Ohio State's going to get in the playoff. I think that they will move in ahead of TCU. When you look at these two teams with no losses, Ohio State has been ahead of TCU consistently throughout the season. So if they both have one loss, you could see the argument there for Ohio State to once again be ahead of TCU. But I think that 22 is going to hang over their heads. And if TCU loses in a very close game to Kansas State, I think TCU is going to get in. If TCU loses by 10 or more, I believe Ohio State will get in. And that is what it's going to come down to, assuming USC wins. Now, if USC loses, like I said, I feel confident that Ohio State's going to be in there at number 4. I believe they will be ahead of Alabama. There will be an argument for Alabama. Of course, it's Alabama, but I think it would be very wrong to put a 2-loss Alabama team in over a 1-loss Ohio State team. Ohio State's loss would have come to a top 2 team. That's also going to help them versus TCU's loss to a Kansas State team that'll be in the top 10, but not quite in that top tier, not an undefeated team. So again, you could go back and forth and find things for both teams here, but at the end of the day, if USC wins, I think Ohio State needs TCU. This is my prediction. They need TCU to lose by 10 or more points. If that happens, I believe the Buckeyes will be in. If that does not happen, if they lose by a touchdown, a field goal, I think TCU is going to get in. Would love to get your thoughts on all of this. I'm sure all the Buckeye fans are going to say that Ohio State will get in. I know you want them to get in, but really look at this. Try to look at this with no bias. Look at it in a fair way, and really, who do you think will get in if it does play out that way, TCU or Ohio State? Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and thanks for watching.